guys, my name is Madison, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my testimony of how I became a Christian and also just some things that God has done in my life. But before we get started, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe to my channel if you want to see more Christian content videos by me. So, to get us started, I actually grew up in a Christian home. I was basically in church from the time I was born. I actually went to a Christian private school. That's where I grew up. So I learned all about the Bible, all about God, and I would consider at the time that I had a relationship with God even at a young age. And I actually said the sinner's prayer when I was 5 years old. And so I definitely would say that I had a relationship with God at the time. It just wasn't mature, and I didn't really completely understand everything about God and a relationship with God, what it took to have a relationship with Him. I knew all the things about God and all the things about the Bible, but I didn't really truly understand what it meant to be a Christian and what it meant to have a relationship with God through Jesus. But of course, like I said, I grew up in church. My family was there all the time. We were so involved as a family. My parents were Sunday school leaders, you name it. We were so involved and we were there all the time. But then when I was 11, 12 years old, some events happened in our lives that kind of caused my family to drop out of church to where we weren't even going on Sundays. And that was a really hard time for me because I had always gone to church my whole entire life, and I didn't understand why we suddenly weren't going, and I felt like something was wrong with me because I was doing the wrong thing by not going, even though I didn't really have a choice in the matter because I was so young. And so I did struggle and have a lot of internal conflict because I was no longer living the life that I was always taught I was supposed to live. But then after going so long without church, I really started going down the wrong path. I started doing things that I never really thought I would ever do, and I started living a life of intentional sin even though I knew it was wrong. All of this at a very young age. I was in middle school and I was partying, I was drinking, I was so boy crazy. It was ridiculous, and I just remember being in a place that I didn't like. And in the back of my mind, I always knew that what I was doing was wrong, and I knew the right way to live. I knew the way that Jesus was calling me to live, and I just wasn't abiding by that because I kind of looked at it as, well, if all these people around me who have been such strong Christian influences in my life, if they're suddenly not living the life that they've always preached, then why should I? And so I had several years of just childhood young adult rebellion, and I feel like most people go through that phase. I feel like a lot of Christians who grow up Christians, they have like a phase where they explore the world and kind of move away from their faith a little bit. And I feel like most people have that phase during high school when they're older teenagers, but I went through all of that when I was pretty young. I was 12, 13, 14 years old, and I was doing all these things that honestly my older brother's friends were doing. So my older brother is 4 years older than me, and so I was friends with all of his friends. I was friends with people his age, and so everything that they did, I did. And I just went through all of those things at a very young age, and I guess you could say like the sheltered child was no longer sheltered, and I was just exposed to a lot of different things that I would say most kids that age don't go through. But then everything changed when I was 15, 16 years old. My parents got a divorce, and that wasn't really devastating to me at the time. To be honest, I was kind of excited about it. I was excited about the newness, and I had been living in an environment for so long that I wasn't happy with, and so it was kind of like a breaking moment for me where I got to remove myself kind of from the situation and start a new life. And so at the time it didn't really bother me like it should have, but then that caught up with me several years later. But with my parents' divorce came, the different custodies between parents and that kind of stuff, and so I moved out and I lived with my mom, and my dad had custody on the weekends. And my dad through the divorce and everything that was happening, he decided to go back to church, and he was there every single Sunday. And so even when I was staying with him on the weekends, I still hadn't been back to church in years, and he was going. And he just kept encouraging me to go with him. And finally I said yes, because I was tired of disappointing him. And so I started going to church with my dad when I was 16, and I had a moment where I rededicated my life to the Lord. I, re-upped my commitment to follow God and to leave my sin behind, to leave my life of intentional sin behind. Because, none of us are perfect, and none of us can live completely sinless lives, because we're all flawed human beings. But we can strive for righteousness. We can strive to abide by God's commands. And that's when I made that shift from, believing in God but not having that relationship with Him, believing in God but not obeying Him and living in intentional sin, to changing my life around, devoting myself to the Lord and never looking back. And so from then on, I have been a Christian 100%, and God has just been so faithful and done so many things in my life that are just completely incredible when I look back on them. I've always been musical. I've been singing since I was 2 years old, and then in high school I started learning the piano, I started learning guitar, and God used my gifts with music to get me involved in the church. So once I rededicated my life, I immediately started serving in the church on the worship team, and I was able to use those talents, the gifts that God had given me, to serve the local church. And from there it just kind of spiraled and kept getting bigger and kept getting bigger, and God just opened so many opportunities for me, and I eventually became the youth worship leader at my church. So I would lead our youth group in worship every single Wednesday, and God taught me a lot. It was also a really cool time in my journey with the Lord, because I was so excited about rededicating my life and about having my relationship with the Lord again. I was so excited to share that with other people. And so I started going into my school. I started ministering to my classmates and the people that I passed in the hallways. I started getting involved in a Christian, kind of like a Christian small group that happened at our school in the mornings. So I was really involved in my school and sharing Jesus with everyone that I knew, and setting an example of what it meant to live for Christ, what it meant to have a relationship with God, and it be real and not just something that you say you believe in, but a lifestyle that you live out. And it was just a really exciting time in my life, because I felt called into ministry, and I knew that God had given me the musical talents for a reason. And so once I graduated high school, I actually moved from Alabama to Missouri by myself, without knowing anybody, to go to Bible college. And it was one of the best decisions I have ever made in my entire life. So I actually went to James River College, which is a part of Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri, but it's like a separate campus for people who want to get a leadership degree and hands-on ministry experience in the church. And so it's at James River Church, and you attend all your classes there with Evangel professors, and then you're also serving in your different practicums in whatever area of ministry that you want to serve in and learn from. And so of course I went into the worship practicum, and God opened so many opportunities. It was so incredible. It was an amazing 2 years of my life, and I loved every second of it. I got to travel around the country leading worship for different conferences and things like that, and even just leading our college in worship every single week was such an incredible learning experience, but it was also a ton of fun. But in the middle of my college experience at James River, I had just finished up my freshman year, and I was staying there in summer housing for the summer so that I could intern in the worship department. And I got a phone call from my mom, and my dad had passed away in a motorcycle accident, and it was the hardest time of my life. So in the midst of incredible opportunities and incredible growth and incredible personal growth and discipleship and just all these amazing things that were going on in my life, in the middle of all that, it was also the most difficult time of my life because I was away from my family, I was grieving, and I didn't know how to grieve. It was a struggle, and I felt like in order to continue to do what God had called me to do, I had to pretend like none of my problems existed and that my grief didn't exist, and I just had to keep pushing forward and acting like nothing was happening, nothing bad happened, nothing was wrong. And because I'd held it in for so long without really addressing my grief, I ended up being diagnosed with an adjustment disorder with anxiety and depression, and I had to go to therapy for several years. I graduated from James River because it was only a 2-year college with your associate's degree, and so instead of staying and continuing on to get my bachelor's degree, I moved home to be with my family after my 2nd year, and I went to therapy for a while. It was a very difficult time. It was a very lonely time, and I mean, obviously when you lose a parent unexpectedly like that, or even expected, it's always going to be difficult. And I still have my relationship with the Lord. I was still leaning on the Lord for strength and for peace and comfort and joy in the midst of all of it. But I just couldn't move past the depression, which coincidentally is why I started a YouTube channel in the first place at the time, because I needed an outlet, and YouTube provided that for me for a while. But then over time I realized that it was just a distraction, which was helpful at the time, but didn't really help me move through the things that I needed to move through emotionally. And then, of course, wouldn't you know, I got diagnosed with a rare sleep disorder. So I was diagnosed with hypersomnia, which is the opposite of insomnia, which basically means that you sleep all the time and you don't really have control over it. So with narcolepsy, you sleep a normal amount of time, you just can't control when you fall asleep. With hypersomnia, you just get an abnormal amount of sleep. Your body can't seem to get enough sleep. So I was sleeping roughly 12 to 16 hours every single day, and I couldn't control it. I could force myself to stay awake if I needed to, but it was a struggle. I was exhausted all the time, completely sleep deprived all the time, no matter how many hours of sleep I got. And so I was on all different kinds of medications. I was on medications for my anxiety and my depression, and then I was on medications for the hypersomnia to wake me up. And so it was just a mess. It was a mess. I was also working a job at the time that I didn't particularly enjoy, and I didn't make a lot of money, and I was just being overworked and exhausted for basically no reason. So I ended up leaving my job because of everything that was going on. I just couldn't physically handle it anymore. And then it was so crazy. God is so cool about how He works, because as soon as I quit my previous job, I got a call from my pastor at my home church asking me if I wanted to start working in our worship department. And it was the job that I had been asking God for several years. And so it was crazy how He opened that door for me at the perfect time. It was literally 30 minutes after I quit my job, I got a call from my pastor. And so I have been working at our church ever since as the assistant worship pastor, and I love my job. It is incredible. And since moving back home from Missouri and starting to work at our church, that is how I reconnected with my husband, and we're going to make a video later talking about how we got together and how God crafted our love story, I guess you could say. But that's where I met my husband, and a lot of things started changing for the positive. And so if you didn't know, my husband is the youth pastor at our church. And so once I started working there, we just kind of reconnected. And now that we're married, not only am I the assistant worship pastor, but I would also consider myself a youth pastor, because I'm the youth pastor's wife and I'm very much involved in the youth ministry as well. And so that is our life. We do ministry all the time. Day in, day out, our life is all about reaching the lost and telling people about Jesus and showing the love of Jesus, showing teenagers especially how much God loves them, teaching them and helping them experience the freedom and joy and excitement, what it means to have a relationship with God through Christ. And it's incredible. I love my life. And real quickly before I finish up, I also want to share this with you because it's a part of my testimony, and I 100% believe that God still does miracles. So I mentioned that I was diagnosed with hypersomnia and anxiety and depression and all of that, and I can tell you that yes, I still sometimes struggle with anxiety and depression. I still have bad days. It still randomly pops up, but that is something I consider myself no longer to struggle with. I'm no longer on any medications. And then with my hypersomnia, there was an evangelist that came to our church, and I went up to the altar for prayer about my hypersomnia, and he didn't even understand what I was really talking about. Like, he didn't understand the condition or the disease, whatever you want to call it. He didn't really understand what it was because he had never heard of it before. But he prayed for me. He prayed for me to be healed. And I haven't dealt with hypersomnia symptoms in over a year. God is so good. He still heals. He's still faithful. And so guys, that is my testimony. Those are some things that God has brought me through, brought me from. And yeah, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to talk with you, and I would love to hear your testimony as well. And if you've been through something similar, let's connect with each other. I think it's so important for believers to connect with other believers and to hold each other up. And if you are struggling with anything, if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or grief, loss, I would love to talk with you. God has taught me so much through those seasons of my life. And so if that is something that you struggle with, please reach out to me. I would love to talk with you. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye. You're all I need.